Right now, people are paying top dollar for this like microscopic edge on their razors that, well, it wasn't engineered in some multi-million-dollar lab.
No, not at all. It was actually accidentally cooked up around 300 million years ago at the bottom of a frozen inland sea.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone, because when you picture, the ultimate straight razor edge, your mind automatically defaults to sterile environments.
Right, like laser-guided synthetic abrasives and mathematically flawless manufacturing. We just assume precision is a strictly modern invention.
Exactly. And it's a totally understandable bias. We're trained to think of precision as something born on a factory line.
But when you look at the pinnacle of straight razor honing, the most sought-after edge doesn't come from an industrial ceramic at all.
No, it comes from a piece of raw earth. A rock that went through this very specific, almost impossibly fortunate sequence of geological events.
Yeah, we are looking at research today on a specific natural whetstone, known in the honing community as the Zulu gray.
Sourced directly from the Pietermaritzburg Formation, right? Down in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa.
That's the one. And to understand why this specific rock is just so revered, we have to look past the modern artisanal workshop. We have to travel way back to the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic eras.
Because before we can even talk about, the physics of a steel blade sliding across a stone, we have to understand the planetary mechanics that actually manufactured the stone itself.
Right, we're talking about the formation of the Karoo Basin. And the basin during this period is just undergoing this massive, violent transition.
Because it starts out as an entirely frozen wasteland, doesn't it? Dominated by the Dwika Group glaciers.
Yeah, a massive continental-scale ice sheet. But as the climate eventually warms up, those huge glaciers begin their retreat.
And when you have ice of that unimaginable volume melting, the water just completely reshapes the Earth's crust.
Exactly. Geologists refer to this specific event as a marine transgression. The ocean essentially breaches its boundaries.
Flooding over all those ancient glacial deposits, it basically turns the Karoo Basin into this massive post-glacial inland sea.
Which is the very first crucial step for our sharpening stone. Because a massive inland body of water like that provides a totally different kinetic environment than, say, a rushing river.
Or a grinding glacier, right. It creates a low-energy marine shelf. And in geology, energy basically dictates what kind of rock you're going to get.
That's a great way to put it. High energy, like a fast-moving river, leaves behind heavy gravel and sand because all the lighter stuff just washes away.
But in the deep, quiet waters of this newly formed inland sea, the energy drops to near zero.
Right. Which means the incredibly fine silt and mud suspended in that glacial meltwater particles so tiny they'd normally stay suspended indefinitely, they finally have the chance to just slowly drift down.
Down to the seafloor. Over millions of years, I like to picture it almost like a massive geological slow cooker.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right, because the ingredients, the glacier melt, the ancient mud, the suspended silt, they're all just left to settle in perfectly still water.
But a pile of mud at the bottom of the sea doesn't sharpen a razor. You need an incomprehensible amount of pressure to actually transform it.
Right, so the slow cooker bakes it. Or really, it's more like a planetary scale hydraulic press.
Exactly. Because it's not just the weight of the water above it, although, that is staggering on its own.
It's the weight of millions of years of subsequent sediment just piling on top of it. You have this fine, uniform mud trapped at the bottom, and the planet just starts squeezing.
Squeezing hard. The scientific terms for that hydraulic press action are compaction and dewatering.
Meaning the weight physically forces the water out of the pore spaces between the clay and silt particles, right?
Yes, it compresses the whole structure.
Yeah.
But the final transformation is actually a chemical one. It's called cementation or induration.
Okay, so the minerals dissolved in whatever water is left behind actually precipitate out and act as like a geological superglue.
That's exactly what happens. The silica and carbonate minerals crystallize within those microscopic gaps. They permanently lock the ultrafine particles to a dense, solid matrix.
So the soft marine mud officially becomes the hard sedimentary rock that they quarry in the Pietermaritzburg Formation today.
Right. But a planetary hydraulic press doesn't just operate in a vacuum. Over the hundreds of millions of years it took to build this formation, things changed.
The climate, the structure of the inland sea, the water depth, it was all shifting.
Exactly. The sediment supply changed. So the resulting rock isn't just one monolithic, perfectly uniform block. Far from it.
Right. The paper points out that it presents as a massive 3-layer geological cake.
Geologists call it an upward coarsening succession. Basically, as you move from the bottom layer to the top, the environment became more chaotic.
And the particles making up the rock become larger, and out of these three distinct layers, only one is the true sweet spot for a sharpening stone.
Right. Only one possesses the exact physical properties required for high-end honing.
So let's break down this cake, starting from the bedrock. The lowest level is what they call the basal transgressive layer, right?
Yes. This is a dark gray, almost black carbonaceous shale. It formed immediately after the sea level rise in the very deepest water.
But it's not great for honing, is it? Because it contains a lot of organic plant debris and these things called drop stones.
Drop stones, yeah. Which, if you're looking for microscopic uniformity, is basically a disaster.
I mean, a drop stone is what happens when a chunk of glacial ice breaks off, floats out over the sea, and melts.
Exactly. And it drops whatever heavy gravel it was carrying straight down into our pristine, fine mud.
Which structurally just ruins it. The paper says the basal layer is closely jointed, meaning it has a high tendency to fracture.
Yeah, if you tried to flatten this stone for honing, it would likely just splinter apart.
And even if it held together, imagine running a delicate, micrometers-thin razor edge across a hidden chunk of glacial gravel.
It would instantly destroy the edge.
Yeah.
So the basal layer is out. It's too weak, too chaotic. Which brings us to the middle layer.
Ah, the central uniform mud rock. The ultimate jackpot for the Zulu gray.
This layer represents an extended golden era of geological stability. For an incredibly long time, the marine shelf was just quiet.
The water depth was consistent. The sediment slowly raining down was beautifully uniform.
And it resulted in this massive band of medium to dark gray shale and siltstone.
And massive is almost an understatement here. The paper notes this middle layer averages 150 to 200 meters thick.
And in certain local areas of the basin, it actually swells to over 400 meters thick.
That is a skyscraper-sized band of pure, consistent honing material.
The consistency is exactly what makes it so valuable. But as we know, nothing lasts forever in geology.
Right. Eventually, that inland sea began to fill up with sediment, which naturally leads to the top layer of our cake.
The upper micaceous mud rock is where the geology translates directly into metallurgy.
Because to understand why it creates such a keen edge, we have to zoom way in, down from 400-meter rock formations to the microscopic level.
We are looking at the microabrasive framework, and there are three distinct components working together here.
Right, the abrasives, the matrix, and the cementation. Let's start with the abrasives, the actual teeth of the stone.
The abrasives in the Zulu gray are primarily very fine quartz and feldspar grains, just a few micrometers across.
So when you slide hardened steel across the surface, these tiny grains act as millions of microscopic chisels.
Right. Because quartz is significantly harder than the steel of a razor blade, it physically shears away the metal.
Replacing deep, jagged scratches with an impossibly dense, shallow scratch pattern. But just having hard quartz grains isn't enough, is it?
No, if you just had compacted quartz dust, the moment the steel bit into the stone, the friction would rip the quartz right out of the surface.
The stone would just crumble, so there has to be a structural backbone holding those microscopic chisels in place.
Which brings us to the second component, the matrix. The quartz and feldspar are locked within a clay and mica fraction.
Mainly kaolinite and elite, according to the paper.
Yes, the clay matrix is what gives the stone its toughness. It absorbs the shear force of the razor blade.
It holds the quartz firmly enough to cut the steel, but yields just enough to prevent the stone from shattering. So it's not like sandpaper where the abrasive is glued to a rigid backing. It's more like an ocean of microscopic diamonds.
The quartz, yeah.
Suspended perfectly throughout an incredibly dense, tough block of hard rubber. The clay matrix. The cutting gems are supported from all sides.
That structural support is critical, especially when we introduce water to the surface.
Oh, right, the slurry. Anyone who hones razors knows about the slurry, that thin paste of water and loose stone particles that builds up.
But what's fascinating is that the slurry produced by the Zulu gray isn't just muddy water.
It's highly refined, right? Because of the specific properties of that kaolinite and elite clay matrix.
Exactly. Instead of the quartz grains acting strictly as fixed chisels, the slurry allows them to act as a loose rolling abrasive.
And a rolling abrasive in a fine clay suspension cushions the blade. It actually reduces the cutting depth of the quartz grains even further,
allowing the user to take a sharp edge and polish it to an almost mirror finish.
Wow. But all of this would be totally useless if the stone itself warped over time.
Which points back to our third microscopic component, the cementation.
The silica and carbonate induration we talked about earlier. Because for a straight razor, your honing surface has to be mathematically flat.
Absolutely. If the stone wears down unevenly and becomes dished out, it will ruin the geometry of the razor's edge.
But the heavy cementation of the Zulu gray makes it incredibly hard and slow-wearing. It resists dishing.
It maintains that perfect planar surface through countless honing sessions.
So when you combine all these factors, the micrometer quartz, the tough clay suspension, the unyielding cementation, you get a very specialized profile.
Yes, the Zulu gray is purely a finishing stone. It is entirely inappropriate for bevel setting.
Right, if you drop a knife and chip the edge, or you're starting from scratch, the Zulu gray is way too slow.
You'd be grinding for days.
It's strictly the final step. You take a blade that's already sharp enough to cut paper, and you refine it until it can sever a freestanding hair.
And users note the tactile feedback is very distinct. A glassy, muted sensation.
Like hydroplaning on glass, right?
Yeah.
Not like you're grinding steel at all.
Exactly. Which ultimately yields a razor edge that's microscopically keen, but smooth enough to comfortably shave your face without microabrasions.
Now, wait. With all this perfection, a 400-meter thick band of rock with the perfect mineralogical recipe, why don't suppliers just selectively mine that specific band?
You mean, why not just slap a layer 2 premium sticker on it and guarantee the exact same stone every time?
Yeah. I mean, in our modern industrialized world, you'd think a massive corporation would have bought the mountain, brought in the laser-guided saws, and pumped out thousands of identical stones.
You would think so, but that is just not the reality of the Peter Maritzburg mudrock. There is no large-scale dimension stone industry for this material.
It's essentially an artisanal Wild West out there. The paper notes the Zulu gray is sourced by a single small-scale operator in South Africa.
Which fundamentally changes how the stone reaches you, the consumer.
Right, because
Yeah.
when you buy a high-end synthetic stone, it comes stamped with an exact rating, like 10,000 grit.
Manufactured in a highly controlled environment. So the one you buy today performs identically to one you buy 10 years from now.
But in a world where we're used to those guarantees, buying a natural stone is basically adopting a unique geological snowflake.
That's a good way to put it. There's no formal grading system. No ISO standard for 300-million-year-old mudrock.
The quality control relies entirely on the eye and experience of the artisan pulling it out of the dirt.
They inspect the raw blocks for obvious structural defects, weathering, hidden cracks, weak bedding planes.
And once they find a solid piece, they flatten it with diamond plates and manually dress or chamfer the sharp edges.
They can guarantee structural integrity, but what they cannot guarantee is the exact microscopic performance.
Because they're hand harvesting from a 400-meter vertical layer, one stone might come from a deeper horizon where the quartz is fractionally smaller.
While another might have slightly more clay in the matrix, both are legitimate Zulu grays from the central layer, but they'll have distinctly different personalities on the bench.
So it shifts the burden of evaluation totally from the factory to the end user. You literally have to test it yourself to figure out what you just bought.
It really requires the user to become a practical metallurgist. The paper actually outlines the standard honing performance tests users rely on.
So if I get a piece of this geological history delivered to my door, my first step is a visual inspection of the scratch pattern, right?
Exactly. You hone a test razor, clean it, and put the edge under a jeweler's loupe or a digital microscope.
Looking for the uniformity of the striae, are the microscopic scratches deep and chaotic, maybe suggesting a coarser piece from the upper limits?
Or are they shallow, dense, and highly polished, confirming you have a top-tier finishing stone?
And once the visual inspection looks good, you move to the physical tests, like the hanging hair test.
Which sounds almost mythological to outsiders, but it's a very precise diagnostic tool for the apex of the blade.
You take a single strand of human hair, hold it by the root, let it hang freely, and just tap the sharpened edge against it.
The interaction between the steel and the hair tells you everything. If the hair pushes away, the blade isn't fully refined.
If it catches and splits the hair lengthwise, you might have a microscopic burr left over from a lower grit stone.
But if the blade touches the hair and it silently pops, falling away with zero resistance,
That is a true, perfectly aligned microedge that tells you your Zulu gray is capable of extreme refinement.
and the final test, of course, is the actual shave test.
Because you can pass the visual and hair tests, but if the stone left a microscopic harshness to the steel, it's gonna feel aggressive on your skin.
A great Zulu gray, leaves a smooth, forgiving edge that wipes away hair without the skin even registering the blade.
It's just a profound shift in perspective. We started out talking about expecting precision from sterile factories.
But we've tracked a journey that proves nature operates on an entirely different scale of precision.
Truly. From an ice age 300 million years ago, to melting glaciers forming a perfectly still inland sea, to planetary physics crushing microscopic quartz into an unyielding matrix.
And finally, a single artisan hand-selecting that mud rock so you can achieve a flawless shave.
It really serves as a reminder that deep time has tangible, functional value in our daily lives, often outperforming modern synthetic alternatives.
Which is pretty humbling, honestly.
It is, and it leaves me with this lingering thought for you to mull over. If this perfect, naturally occurring microscopic tool was just sitting in an unmapped sedimentary layer in KwaZulu-Natal, what else is down there?
That's a great question.
Right. How many other perfectly engineered natural tools materials with thermal, acoustic, or abrasive properties we haven't even conceived of are buried a few hundred feet beneath us right now?
Just completely ignored.
Because modern society is too busy trying to manufacture a synthetic alternative in a laboratory. Next time you rely on a high-precision tool, take a moment to consider where its capabilities actually originated.
It might just be a silent remnant of a world that existed millions of years before us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.